At T-Mobile, our critical mission is providing unparalleled 5G coverage for when connectivity is mission critical. Introducing T-Priority, America's best 5G network experience for first responders, even in times of congestion. More capacity, faster speeds, better coverage. T-Priority from T-Mobile, built for tomorrow's emergencies, ready today. Discover more at t-priority.com.
For qualifying organizations on eligible rate plans, coverage not available in some areas and may be impacted by emergencies.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
This episode is brought to you by State Farm. From your morning podcast to your afternoon playlist, State Farm knows you personalize your entire day. And that's why State Farm helps you personalize your insurance with the State Farm Personal Price Plan. It offers coverage options that help protect what you care about most at an affordable price just for you. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Prices vary by state. Options selected by customer. Availability and eligibility may vary.
It's a chilly afternoon in Westfield, New Jersey. Rob Minnick, a recent Georgetown grad, is on his way to a Gamblers Anonymous meeting.
By the end of my gambling, I had found myself making upwards of 100 to 150 bets a night, and that's just on sports.
A recent CBS News mini-documentary profiles Minnick and others who are struggling with gambling addiction.
You feel like you have no other alternative but to keep going because you've dug yourself such a deep hole, but you're just digging in the same direction.
Minnick has been in recovery for over a year. He arrives at the meeting to share his struggles with peers who also suffer from gambling disorder.
I started gambling at the age of 18 with daily fantasy sports. As time went on, that moved to regular sports betting, casino games, and by the end of it, was spinning slots in my pocket with just listening in my headphones, not even needing to see the result to know what had happened.
Other voices echo his sentiments, each participant sharing their descent into the depths of gambling addiction, each story more harrowing than the one before. At face value, the site is nothing particularly new. Gamblers Anonymous has been around in the United States for more than 50 years, following in the footsteps of other 12-step programs like Alcoholics Anonymous. It's meant to help those with compulsive gambling problems to share their experiences with one another and instill the hope and strength necessary to navigate recovery. But what is different is the alarming of young men like Minnick who are now joining the program. Listen to the observations of a longtime Gamblers Anonymous member.
Years ago, before online casinos, if we had a person coming in under 24 years old, it was rare, all right? Now the norm, the real norm, it's kids coming in at 17 years old. So what's changed? Well, it all goes back to a 2018 Supreme Court decision that overturned a federal ban on sports betting. The implications of that decision have been massive. Today, millions of Americans, young people especially, are betting on sports from the convenience of their smartphones. Now, the Supreme Court's ruling didn't invent a gambling crisis in America. But what it did do is morph that crisis into a five-alarm fire, causing huge increases in compulsive gambling as Americans have access to sports betting at their fingertips, with the encouragement of major leagues like the NFL, NBA, NHL, and MLB. Young men especially are experiencing much higher levels of gambling disorder since the ruling, as sports betting apps that market to a youthful audience rake in billions of dollars each year. As more and more Americans struggle with compulsive gambling and its severe impacts, we can't help but wonder, what are the consequences of legalized sports betting? Hey everyone, it's Kavitha Davidson, and welcome back to Sportly. Today, we're taking a look at sports gambling, tracing a history of scandals, prohibitions, and a growing public health crisis in the present day.
For a long time, the sports world treated gambling as a cardinal sin. Leagues feared that allowing sports betting would increase corruption and match fixing after a slew of gambling-related scandals shook the sports world again and again. That fear reached a boiling point in the 90s. In 1992, the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act, or PASPA, was signed into law. The legislation is sometimes referred to as the Bradley Act, after former NBA star and U.S. Senator Bill Bradley, who introduced the bill. And it essentially outlawed sports betting nationwide, though it carved out exceptions for Oregon, Delaware, Montana, and of course, Nevada. Fast forward to today, and as we know, sports betting is legal in many states across the country.
In a 6-3 vote, the nation's highest court struck down a 1992 ruling that banned sports gambling in many states.
As a result, much of that fear surrounding the corrupting influence of gambling has left the national conversation. But why was that fear so prevalent in the first place, enough to warrant the passage of a national ban? Well, suffice it to say that looking to America's past, there's plenty of cause for concern. As organized sports leagues became more and more popular throughout the 1900s, along came a slew of scandals that spoke to how sports gambling can go hand in hand with corruption. Perhaps most famously, there's the 1919 Black Sox scandal. It's October 9th, 1919. Fans are gathered at Comiskey Park in Illinois for Game 8 of the World Series. It was a best-of-9 series that year. This year, it's the Chicago White Sox versus the Cincinnati Reds. The Reds jump out front early, scoring 4 runs in the first inning, and the White Sox can't catch up. Cincinnati triumphs with a score of 10-5, winning the World Series 5-3. But what appears at first to be a routine finish to the World Series soon turns into the most massive gambling scandal in the history of sports.
Tonight marks the 100th anniversary of a notorious moment in baseball history, the White Sox losing to the Cincinnati Reds in the 1919 World Series. The scandal that followed stained the sport's reputation.
At first, there's only whispers. Believing the series was rigged based on some tips he received from professional gamblers, sports writer Hugh Fullerton publishes an expose in the newspaper New York World in December 1919. The headline reads, "Big League Baseball being run for gamblers, with ball players in the deal?" But in spite of his reporting, it takes nearly a year for the league to take action. In September 1920, a grand jury is called to investigate the charge that Chicago players threw the game in exchange for bribes. And of course, these rumors turn out to be true. 4 White Sox players admit to accepting tens of thousands of dollars from racketeering gamblers to throw the World Series 5-3. And to this day, the identity of those gamblers is unknown. But one thing's for sure, their actions fueled a century of fear surrounding the potential of sports betting to corrupt the game.
As I said, all you have to do is relax and maybe miss a basket now and then.
Since the White Sox threw the World Series all those years ago, there have been plenty more instances of corrupt gamblers. There have been huge controversies like the 1951 NCAA point shaving scandal, when the City College of New York men's basketball team was caught throwing games in exchange for cash rewards. Of course, there's the infamous case of Pete Rose, one of the greatest baseball players in history, who would ultimately be banned from MLB for life for betting on baseball, including betting on his own team, the Cincinnati Reds. We could go on and on listing off the names of all the players or staff who've been caught in illicit gambling schemes. And that's precisely why, as you heard earlier, leagues and government leaders deemed it necessary to explicitly outlaw sports betting in the 90s. But as time went on, some began to question whether the U.S. had been taking the wrong approach. Could it be that all these controversies make the case to actually legalize sports betting? Wouldn't it be better to have all of this gambling out in the open, rather than in back rooms, unseen and unregulated, and most importantly, untaxed? Here's Chad Millman with ESPN The Magazine summarizing arguments made in favor of legalization.
What you're seeing from the people who run gaming businesses to the commissioner of the NBA is they understand that light is the best disinfectant. And so they think if there are more people focusing on this, more people paying attention to this, if we are taking it out of the shadows and we are regulating it, then there's better chances that people will not have the opportunity to fix games.
You heard mention of the commissioner of the NBA there. That's Adam Silver, one of the first and most influential sports leaders to speak out in favor of legalized sports betting, even as most leagues remained against the idea. And he formally announced his support in a November 2017 New York Times op-ed. Here's Silver speaking to the Golick and Wingo radio show on ESPN.
We should regulate it. We should legalize it. It's not to me an issue of whether I'm pro or con sports betting. We know now that it goes on largely underground. Hundreds of billions of dollars are bet every year just in the United States on sports betting. State government leaders joined in on that conversation too, wanting to cash in on a potentially lucrative sports betting market. In the years leading up to the 2018 Supreme Court decision, states like New York, Indiana, and South Carolina all tried legalizing sports gambling in their states. New Jersey got especially involved in the fight, wanting to legalize sports betting in their many casinos and racetracks. The state is home to Atlantic City, a town heavily reliant on gambling that's fallen on hard economic times.
Let's figure out a legal way to do this where it can be regulated, it can be taxed, it can provide revenues not only for the racetracks and the state, but money can go to others also, like senior citizens, property tax relief, medical care, whatever the needs are of the individual state.
That was Dennis Drazen, a lawyer with the New Jersey racetrack. His and others' advocacy in favor of legalized sports gambling set the scene for a court decision that would upend the gambling world.
Halliday presents, in the red corner, the undisputed, undefeated Weed Whacker Guy. Champion of hurling grass and pollen everywhere. And in the blue corner, the challenger, extra strength Halliday. Eye drops that work all day to prevent the release of histamines that cause itchy allergy eyes. And the winner by knockout is Halliday. Halliday, bring it on.
This episode is brought to you by Peacock. The new Peacock original documentary, Matthew Perry, A Hollywood Tragedy, dives deep into the beloved actor's rise to fame and his tragic death. 5 people, including Perry's personal assistant, 2 medical doctors, and an alleged Hollywood drug dealer known as the Ketamine Queen, were charged with conspiracy to illegally provide Perry with the ketamine. Explore the details of the case in this heartbreaking special, streaming now only on Peacock.
Back in this country, the Supreme Court has ruled that states have the power to legalize sports betting. The case came from New Jersey.
After New Jersey passed legislation that legalized sports betting in 2012, they were sued by the NBA, NFL, NHL, MLB, and the NCAA. The Department of Justice joined the lawsuit a year later. The case was appealed all the way up to the Supreme Court, leading to that 2018 ruling, Murphy v. National College Athletic Association, that found the federal ban on sports betting under PASPA to be unconstitutional. Unsurprisingly, gambling business leaders rejoiced. Jeff Freeman, the CEO of the American Gambling Association, called it, quote, a victory for the millions of Americans who seek to bet on sports in a safe and regulated manner. He suggested that through smart, efficient regulation, sports integrity would be preserved and, crucially, consumers would be protected. Other state legislatures have since capitalized on the lifting of the ban. 38 states plus D.C. have legalized sports betting in some form, either online or in person. And the result? The worlds of sports and gambling are converging like never before. Leagues like the NBA, NFL, NHL, and MLB that were in court not long ago fighting tooth and nail against legalized gambling have now completely embraced it. They're running ads for online sportsbooks like DraftKings and FanDuel, and many have formalized partnerships with betting houses, raking in billions of dollars. Star players are getting in on the action too, like the NBA's LeBron James and the NHL's Connor McDavid, each of whom have lucrative partnerships with sports gambling platforms. And of course, we can't forget the state governments who kicked off legalized sports betting and are now reaping the benefits in the form of billions in tax revenue. So now that everything's out in the open and the money is flowing, the years of controversy surrounding gambling in sports can finally come to an end, right? Well, not quite. Meet Lee Percy Christian III.
Betting is a part of the experience. You're not just down here to watch the game. The advertisements are clear as day that if you're gonna come down here, make sure you put in some money on the game.
Christian is a part-time Arizona State student who fell into the depths of gambling addiction after the state legalized sports betting in 2021. Like Minnick from earlier, he agrees to share his story as part of CBS News' mini-documentary. He walks through downtown Phoenix with a CBS reporter, pointing out the brick-and-mortar sports books that crowd Footprint Arena, home of the Phoenix Suns, establishments that have cost him thousands of dollars.
You know, the temptation's always gonna be there. Caesars, right down there. We have FanDuel here. So we're all in America on sports betting.
Christian ended up enlisting in a self-exclusion program that barred him from betting at these sports books. But thanks to the ease of accessing sports betting apps, his addiction didn't end there. He lost his job in November 2023, and less than a week later, his $10,000 savings had all been lost to gambling.
Whatever I had left, it was gone very fast. And my grandmother, I called her and I was like, you know, how much money do you have right now? And she sent it, and I started gambling with it. I knew at that point that I didn't have control.
It might be easy to chalk up stories like Christian's to an anomaly, a tragic side effect from otherwise seemingly successful legislation. But when you look at the data, it's clear that Christian is far from the only one to fall victim to a predatory sports betting industry. Since sports betting was legalized in 2018, Americans have spent nearly $500 billion placing bets on sporting events. Like last month's Super Bowl, when Americans wagered an estimated $1.4 billion, the highest amount in Super Bowl history. As sports betting grows more popular with each passing year, over 2 million American adults are reportedly suffering from gambling addiction. And it's already having visible effects on their pocketbooks. Researchers at UCLA found that in states where online sports betting is legalized, bankruptcy filings have soared by 28%. That's an additional 30,000 filings per year. Young men are especially susceptible to compulsive gambling. 10% of U.S. men ages 18 to 30 are showing behavior that indicates gambling disorder. Just think back. We've heard their stories in this very episode, whether it be Rob Minnick in New Jersey or Lee Percy Christian in Arizona. We've heard from longtime recovering addicts who are sounding the alarm that this disorder is affecting young men more and more. And it shouldn't be hard to see why, right? I mean, first of all, even though nearly half of all sports fans are women, sports are still seen as the domain of men, and advertisers certainly target male consumers more. And we know that young people are on their smartphones far more than older Americans, and sports betting apps like FanDuel and DraftKings are much easier to access than in-person gambling houses. That second piece really makes all the difference. When we listen to the stories of young men struggling with gambling disorder, smartphones are pretty much always involved, and often the very reason users feel so constantly tempted. It doesn't help that the gambling industry is acutely aware of this new and lucrative audience, as they flood social media platforms with advertising for their sportsbook apps. And these ads are subject to far less regulation than they should be in the eyes of many who are concerned with the rise in compulsive gambling.
What is that? Every bettor has a system. Make FanDuel's responsible gaming tools a key part of yours.
Let's face it, These betting companies aren't going to regulate themselves. No business can. The more Americans betting, the far better for their bottom line. And sure, every state that has legalized sports gambling has some kind of regulation in place. But there's no national comprehensive regulation, and a piecemeal approach is not enough. Connecticut Senator Richard Blumenthal calls state regulation, quote, faint-hearted and half-baked, as he and others are pushing Congress to pass federal legislation to protect Americans who bet on sports, though their efforts really haven't gone anywhere yet. So let's take a step back. Those who pushed for sports gambling to be legalized have gotten their way. America's sports betting market is raking in billions of dollars every year. But have we gone about this the wrong way? Could it be possible to maintain access to sports gambling while pursuing the kinds of regulations that would actually protect Americans from developing problematic behaviors? I'll say this personally, I, for years, have been an advocate for legalized sports betting because I saw how much activity was happening underground and in back rooms. And when you bring that behavior above ground, you can legalize it and regulate it and, of course, tax it. But everyone I know who was calling for legal sports betting in the same breath was also calling for very strict regulation. And that just hasn't happened. Many of us pointed to other countries that have legalized sports betting, like the UK and Ireland, and basically said we need to learn from the mistakes that they'd made. We're lucky that we aren't the first country to experiment with legal sports gambling, and there is a lot that we can learn from taking a look around. The UK has been suffering from a gambling public health crisis not unlike the one that we're seeing here.
NHS England says the proliferation of online gambling means adults and children are now bombarded with advertising, where they say bets can be placed at the touch of a button and where there are incentives like free bets to draw in new customers.
In April 2020, the UK's Gambling Commission announced it was banning the use of credit cards to place bets, citing a study that 1 in 5 gamblers using credit cards were suffering from addiction. The move disrupted a nearly $20 billion industry fueled by almost 1 million British adults using credit cards to place bets. But more importantly, it ensured that British citizens aren't gambling money that they don't have. And that's not all. Just last year, the UK took their restrictions a step further, instating a new policy referred to as affordability checks. Essentially, gambling agencies are responsible for placing limits on customers who are losing £500 or more a month. And think of it like how your credit card company sets a spending limit. Ostensibly, at least on paper, you're not allowed to charge more than you can afford. It's based on your income. That's the principle behind affordability checks. Of course, these details would need to be fine-tuned, but these are two policies that the United States could instill that could make a huge difference in ensuring that Americans aren't gambling away financial resources that they can't afford to lose. That's a good start, but how can we prevent more vulnerable, younger populations from getting into gambling in the first place? If we look abroad, there's answers for that too. Researchers have found that a big source of the harm caused by gambling disorder is unrestricted advertising to particularly vulnerable groups. It's similar to the decades of predatory advertising practices by tobacco companies targeting the youth.
Yes, according to this repeated nationwide survey, more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette.
Policymakers might be able to prevent young people from getting hooked by instating limits on those ads like Ireland has done. They've done things like requiring social media users to opt in to seeing gambling ads, which limits who platforms can serve these ads to. And they've also banned gambling ads on television and radio from 5:30 a.m. to 9 p.m. These kinds of reforms could make a real difference in preventing Americans from getting sucked into unhealthy habits, especially as they're entering adulthood. They may well become increasingly necessary in a nation that still hasn't quite cracked the code on how to handle sports betting, even as sportsbooks have grown into a multi-billion-dollar industry. And of course, there's no one right answer. Gambling will always be a reality in the sports world. But the question of how much that betting should be facilitated and regulated by sports leagues and policymakers is a really essential one. One thing's for sure, gambling disorder has the potential to be a truly destructive force in someone's life, as depicted in the stories we heard in this episode. So regardless of where you land, it's important that we all know the signs of compulsive gambling. If you or someone you know is thinking about gambling all the time, feeling the need to bet more money and bet more often, trying to win their money back, or feeling like they've lost control of their betting, a gambling problem might be involved. Call 1-800-GAMBLER or text 800-GAM, 800-GAM for help. Thanks for tuning into Sportly. We'll be back with a new episode next week. Sportly is an Immigrantly media production. This episode was produced by Sadia Khan. Our associate producer is Andrea Koskai. Written by Nicholas Black and me, Kavitha Davidson. Research and fact-checking by Suhasini Patni. Our sound designer and editor is Paroma Chakravarti. Our theme music was created by Simon Hutchinson. Other music by Epidemic Sound. Tune back in next week for more Sportly.